He was born in a mountain town, so small, most Italians couldn't find it on a map. His father was a tailor, not a designer, not an artist with a famous name stitched into a label, just a man who cut cloth for the farmers and shopkeepers of a Sicilian village, working with his hands from sunrise until his eyes gave out under the lamplight. His mother sold fabric out of the family shop. There was no money for fashion school in Milan, not really, and even when there was, he dropped out before finishing. You would think a boy like this, with no formal training completed, no family name, no connections to the glittering world of Italian couture, would spend his life exactly where he started, making suits for neighbors in a town of 4,000 people. Well, that boy's name was Domenico Dolce, and together with a young man from a working-class family near Milan named Stefano Gabbana, he would build one of the most recognizable luxury empires on earth, a company worth billions, a brand that dressed Madonna, that dressed movie stars, that turned Sicilian black lace and grandmother's religious medallions into the height of global glamour. So how did a tailor's son from a village nobody had heard of end up reshaping what the world considers beautiful? To find out, we have to go back to 1958, to a town called Polizzi Generosa, perched high in the mountains of Sicily. Polizzi Generosa sits nearly 1,000 meters above sea level, wrapped in fog half the year, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and nothing ever seems to change. This was where Domenico Dolce entered the world, the son of Saverio Dolce, a tailor, and Rosaria, a woman with sharp instincts for business who worked alongside her husband selling fabric and clothing. The Dolce household didn't have extra money lying around. What they had was work. Constant, hands-on, generational work. From the time Domenico could walk, he was in that shop, surrounded by bolts of cloth, spools of thread, the hiss of a pressing iron. He watched his father measure a man's shoulders and somehow, from that measurement alone, construct something that fit like a second skin. You see, most children who grow up around a trade learn to tolerate it. Domenico fell in love with it. While other boys in Polizzi Generosa were out kicking a ball around the piazza, Domenico was sketching. He was studying the way fabric moved, the way a well-cut jacket could change how a person stood, how they carried themselves down the street. There was one detail that set young Domenico apart from every other tailor's son in that mountain town, and it would end up defining his entire career. His father traveled to Milan regularly to source fabric, and he would come home with fashion magazines tucked under his arm. For a boy in a village where the biggest event of the year was a religious festival, those magazines were a window into another universe entirely. Domenico studied them obsessively. He wasn't just looking at pretty pictures, he was decoding them, tracing the silhouettes, trying to understand why one dress looked powerful and another looked forgettable. By his teenage years, he had made a decision most people around him thought was, frankly, a little delusional. He wasn't going to spend his life quietly tailoring suits in Polizzi Generosa. He was going to Milan. He was going to become somebody in fashion. Here's the thing about that dream, though. Milan didn't care where you came from unless where you came from was useful to a story. And in the early 1980s, a poor Sicilian accent and a resume with no finished degree wasn't exactly a golden ticket. Domenico's father, to his enormous credit, supported the ambition. He helped his son enroll at the prestigious Istituto Marangoni in Milan, one of the top fashion schools in the country. It should have been the beginning of a clean, traditional success story. Instead, Domenico dropped out before he ever earned his diploma. He believed he already knew enough. He believed the classroom was slowing him down. Now, I want you to sit with that for a second, because that decision could have ended his career before it started. No degree, no safety net, no family fortune, just a headstrong 20-something with sketches in his notebook and a stubborn belief in his own eye. That belief, that raw, unshakable confidence paired with almost no formal credentials to back it up, would become the flaw that followed Domenico Dolce for the rest of his life. Critics would later call him arrogant. Rivals would say he and his eventual partner were reckless, unpolished, too provocative, too Sicilian for the refined salons of Milan fashion. But here's what nobody in that mountain village could have predicted. The very thing that made Domenico an outsider, his working-class roots, his unfinished education, his stubborn devotion to his own instincts, would one day become the exact ingredient that made Dolce & Gabbana impossible to copy. But that was a long way off. First, Domenico Dolce had to survive Milan. And Milan, in the early 1980s, was not interested in giving a Sicilian tailor's son anything for free. Domenico had achieved something, at least. He'd made it out of Polizzi Generosa and into the beating heart of Italian fashion. But being in Milan and being somebody in Milan were two very different things, and Domenico was about to learn just how much the industry doubted outsiders like him. In 1980, working as an assistant for designer Giorgio Correggiari, Domenico crossed paths with a young man named Stefano Gabbana. Stefano's background wasn't glamorous either. His parents worked in a factory and a laundry near Milan. Two working-class kids thrown into the same cramped studio space, both hungry, both broke, both convinced they had something to say. You would think this would be an instant partnership, the kind of meet-cute you see in movies. It wasn't. Domenico, protective of his sketches and terrified someone might steal his ideas, actually saw Stefano as a threat at first. A rival circling the same tiny pool of opportunity. However, something shifted. The two started talking, really talking, about fabric, about silhouette, about the kind of woman they wanted to dress, not the cold, aloof runway mannequin that dominated Italian fashion at the time, but someone sensual, someone with curves, someone who looked like she'd just walked out of a Sicilian summer. That shared vision would turn two rivals into the tightest creative partnership in modern fashion history. By 1982, Dolce & Gabbana had pooled what little they had and opened a small design consulting studio. 2 years later, in 1984, they scraped together enough to launch their own label. This is where I think a lot of aspiring designers would have played it safe. Rent a proper venue, hire a proper PR team, do things the right way. Dolce & Gabbana had no money for any of that, so they did something else entirely. I remember our first show, Domenico would later recall to a journalist from The Guardian. We did it in a small apartment in Milan. We organized it ourselves, me and Stefano, without PR, with nothing. My sister and my brother were on the door. Picture that for a second. No red carpet, no celebrity front row, just two broke designers using friends off the street as models, hosting their debut collection in a cramped Milan apartment with family members literally guarding the entrance. If you had walked past that building in 1984, you never would have guessed you were watching the seeds of a multi-billion-dollar empire get planted. But Domenico and Stefano weren't done being scrappy. Desperate to get noticed in a city crowded with established houses like Armani, Versace, and Valentino, they started holding shows in the strangest venues they could find, including at one point a fast food restaurant. Their invitations for that show were shaped like hamburgers. I mean, think about the audacity of that. Two unknown Sicilian and Milanese designers competing for attention against fashion titans with decades of prestige, and their move was to mail out invitations shaped like cheeseburgers. It was weird, it was cheap, and it worked because it made people talk. That unconventional hustle generated just enough buzz to land them an actual slot at Milan Fashion Week in 1985. Their 1985 debut on the official Milan Fashion Week calendar should have been the triumphant moment where everything changed overnight. It wasn't. The fashion establishment noticed them, sure, but noticing isn't the same as embracing. Critics were lukewarm. Buyers were cautious. Domenico and Stefano's early aesthetic, body-conscious, deeply Italian, unapologetically sexual, drenched in the religious iconography and dark romance of Sicily, was a hard sell to an industry that, at the time, favored sleek minimalism and cool detachment. However, this was where the paradox of Domenico Dolce's upbringing started working in his favor. He wasn't trying to fit into Milan's polished mold. He was pulling Milan into his world, the world of his mother's fabric shop, his grandmother's black lace, the Madonna statues, and gold crucifixes of his childhood church. Because to him, none of that was a costume. It was memory. And you can't fake memory. Building a fashion house from nothing meant sacrifice, and Domenico and Stefano made plenty of it in those early years. They poured every lira back into the label. They worked without proper salaries. They slept very little. There were seasons where they genuinely didn't know if there would be enough orders to keep the lights on in their small workshop. Yet slowly, something started to shift. Boutique buyers who had initially passed on the collection began placing small orders. A handful of fashion editors started mentioning the name Dolce & Gabbana in their coverage, almost as an aside at first, then with more curiosity. By the late 1980s, the brand had built a niche but devoted following, people who wanted fashion that felt like it had blood in it, not just fabric. What made the partnership work in the end was the fact that Domenico and Stefano were not identical talents fighting over the same skill set. They complemented each other in ways that took years to fully click into place. Domenico had the technical foundation, the tailoring instinct passed down from his father's shop, an almost architectural sense of how a garment should be constructed. Stefano brought something different, a sharper commercial eye, a talent for provocation, an understanding of image and spectacle that helped translate Domenico's Sicilian sensibility into something the wider world could actually see and want. Neither piece worked without the other. This is a detail that gets lost in a lot of fashion mythology. This idea of the lone genius designer sketching alone in a garret somewhere. The truth, in Domenico's case, is messier and more interesting. His genius needed a translator, and he found one in a rival who became, over time, the closest collaborator of his life. Then came a decision that would define the entire trajectory of the brand. The choice to lean even harder into Sicily rather than sand down its edges. Many designers, once they start gaining traction in a major market, soften their identity to appeal to a broader audience. Domenico did the opposite. He and Stefano built their entire design philosophy around 3 pillars, ones Domenico would describe directly in an interview years later. We built our fashion around 3 fundamental concepts: Sicily, tailoring, and tradition. This wasn't a marketing gimmick cooked up by an agency. This was Domenico's actual childhood, poured directly into every seam. The tailoring precision he learned watching his father. The religious black and gold intensity of small-town Sicilian churches. The sensuality of Mediterranean women who didn't apologize for their bodies. Where other Italian houses were chasing a kind of cool European neutrality, Dolce & Gabbana was doing something almost nobody else in high fashion was doing at that volume. Telling one specific, deeply personal, working-class regional story, and telling it with total conviction. There's another layer to this partnership that I think makes it even more remarkable, and it's worth pausing on. Somewhere along the way, as Domenico and Stefano built the label together, their relationship deepened into something beyond business. They fell in love. For close to 2 decades, Domenico Dolce and Stefano Gabbana were partners in every sense of the word, co-founders, co-designers, and a couple, though they never married. They didn't publicly confirm the romantic side of their relationship until 1999, keeping their private life private, even as their professional life became one of the most scrutinized in fashion. Running a company together is hard enough. Running a company together while also building a life together, under the constant glare of an industry that thrives on gossip, is an entirely different level of pressure. And yet, somehow, that closeness seemed to sharpen their creative instincts rather than complicate them. Every collection felt like a conversation between two people who trusted each other completely, because in a very real sense, it was. This is where things would take a turn toward real recognition. Through the late 1980s and into the early 1990s, Dolce & Gabbana's runway shows started generating real industry buzz. Their designs were bold, corsetry as outerwear, leopard print used with total confidence, tailored suits with an edge of danger to them. And then, in 1990, the moment that would change absolutely everything walked through their door, quite literally. Madonna, at the height of her fame, and in the middle of promoting her documentary Truth or Dare, began wearing Dolce & Gabbana. For a brand still fighting for legitimacy in an industry dominated by established houses, having the single biggest pop star on the planet choose your clothes was like winning the lottery and having someone hand-deliver the check. But Domenico and Stefano didn't just get lucky once. They capitalized. In 1993, Madonna selected Dolce & Gabbana to design costumes for her Girly Show World Tour, more than 1,500 costumes, seen by millions of fans across the globe, night after night, city after city. Every single outfit was a walking advertisement for two designers who, less than a decade earlier, had been mailing out hamburger-shaped invitations because they couldn't afford a real venue. This was the moment. This was the payoff for every sleepless night, every unpaid season, every cramped apartment show. Domenico Dolce, the tailor's son from a mountain town most people couldn't locate, was now dressing the most famous woman in music. Could a partnership built in a rival's shadow really produce something this massive? By this point, I think you know the answer. Success, though, brings its own kind of pressure, and Dolce & Gabbana's rapid ascent through the 1990s came with new challenges nobody had prepared them for. Running a company this size required infrastructure, financial strategy, global retail expansion, none of which Domenico had learned watching his father cut fabric in Polizzi Generosa. And this wasn't all. As the brand's visibility exploded, so did scrutiny. Rival houses that had once dismissed Dolce & Gabbana as too loud, too provocative, too Sicilian, were now watching a competitor eat into their market share. And that kind of success invites enemies. Throughout the 1990s and the 2000s, the brand kept expanding anyway. Flagship boutiques opening in major cities worldwide, a secondary D&G diffusion line launched to capture a younger, more accessible market. Fragrance and eyewear licensing deals multiplying the brand's reach far beyond the runway. By 2009, roughly 25 years after two broke designers held a fashion show in an apartment, Dolce & Gabbana operated more than 100 stores, employed around 4,000 people, and generated billions of dollars in annual revenue. It was, by almost any measure, one of the great fashion success stories of the modern era. But before any of that expansion could feel settled, Domenico had to survive a different kind of crisis, one that had nothing to do with money or courtrooms, and everything to do with the heart. In February 2005, after close to 20 years together, Domenico and Stefano announced that their romantic relationship had ended. For a couple whose personal bond had been so tightly woven into the DNA of their company, this was the kind of split that destroys business partnerships all the time. Two people who built an empire together, who shared a home and a life together, suddenly navigating a breakup while still expected to sit across from each other in the same design studio every single day. You would think the label might fracture right along with the relationship. It didn't. Domenico said publicly at the time that on a professional level, we are still together. He added that they work together wonderfully well and that they have a very strong understanding. That distinction, the ability to close one chapter of their relationship while keeping the creative partnership fully intact, turned out to be one of the most quietly impressive things either man ever pulled off. The clothes didn't get worse. The collections didn't lose their edge. If anything, the label kept climbing, proof that whatever bound Domenico and Stefano together ran deeper than romance alone. However, success would be short-lived in its simplicity, because the next chapter of Domenico Dolce's story was about to get a lot more complicated. In June 2013, Domenico and Stefano were convicted in an Italian court of hiding roughly $1.3 billion in income from tax authorities. The court found that the pair had sold their brand's trademarks to a Luxembourg-based holding company back in 2004, allegedly to avoid declaring taxes on royalty income. The sentence was 20 months suspended. If you're a designer whose entire brand identity is built on honesty, on family, on Sicilian tradition and integrity, being publicly convicted of financial deception is about as damaging a blow as you can imagine. The stakes here weren't just legal, they were existential. Everything Domenico and Stefano had built their name on, trust, authenticity, the idea that Dolce & Gabbana represented something real, was suddenly on trial in the court of public opinion. Think about the scale of what was actually at risk here for a moment. This wasn't some small design house that could quietly close its doors and disappear if the verdict went badly. By 2013, Dolce & Gabbana employed thousands of people across dozens of countries. Retail partners, factory workers, boutique staff, an entire supply chain of Italian artisans who depended on the brand's name meaning something. A criminal conviction upheld on appeal wouldn't just have damaged Domenico and Stefano personally, it risked unraveling contracts, licensing deals, and the trust of luxury retailers around the globe who had spent decades associating the Dolce & Gabbana name with Italian craftsmanship, not courtroom scandal. Everything the two of them had built since that hamburger-shaped invitation stunt back in the 80s was, in a very real sense, hanging in the balance of a single appellate ruling. The defining choice in this crisis wasn't really a choice at all in the traditional sense. It was whether to fight the conviction through appeal or accept the label of tax criminals and let the brand absorb that reputational damage forever. Domenico and Stefano chose to fight. They appealed the ruling, and in April 2014, a court upheld the conviction, but reduced the sentence to 18 months due to a statute of limitations technicality. It looked for a moment like the story might end there. Two designers, once celebrated as self-made icons of Italian craftsmanship, permanently branded as convicted tax evaders. But then, on October 24, 2014, Italy's highest court overturned the previous rulings entirely. Domenico Dolce and Stefano Gabbana were found not guilty of criminal tax evasion. The company still faced a massive civil fine, 340 million euros, in back taxes and penalties, but the criminal shadow had lifted. Domenico Dolce had done the impossible. He had survived a conviction that could have ended everything, and he had come out the other side still standing, still designing, still Domenico Dolce of Dolce & Gabbana. You would think, after weathering something like that, the hardest chapter was behind him. It wasn't. In late 2018, Dolce & Gabbana walked directly into the biggest crisis of its modern history. And this time, it wasn't a courtroom that nearly brought the brand down. It was a marketing campaign. Ahead of a major runway show planned for Shanghai, the brand released a series of promotional videos on Chinese social media, featuring an Asian model attempting, awkwardly and mockingly, to eat Italian food, pizza, spaghetti, a cannoli, using chopsticks, while a voiceover deliberately mispronounced the brand's own name. Chinese audiences saw it immediately for what it appeared to be: a condescending, culturally tone-deaf stereotype dressed up as playful marketing. The backlash was instant and enormous. The phrase "boycott Dolce" appeared more than 18,000 times on Chinese social media within days. And then it got dramatically worse. Screenshots surfaced showing what was allegedly a private conversation involving Stefano Gabbana, in which he used vulgar, deeply offensive language to describe China. The screenshots spread across Chinese platforms within hours, attached to the hashtag #BoycottDolce. Whether the account was hacked, as the company later claimed, or the messages were genuine, barely mattered at that point. And the damage was already spiraling. Within 2 hours of the story breaking, hundreds of Chinese models and actors scheduled to walk in the brand's Shanghai show pulled out. The brand's Chinese ambassador terminated his contract publicly. Major Chinese e-commerce platforms pulled tens of thousands of Dolce & Gabbana products from their shelves entirely. The Shanghai show, months in the planning, was cancelled just hours before it was set to begin. For a company that had spent years building presence in one of the largest luxury markets on the planet, this wasn't just an embarrassment. It was catastrophic, immediate, global news, and it threatened to undo years of careful market expansion in a matter of days. This is the moment where I think you have to ask yourself what it actually takes to survive something like this. Not a courtroom battle you can appeal, not a slow financial decline you can quietly restructure. A public relations disaster of that scale, in the era of instant global outrage, has ended entire brands. Domenico and Stefano issued apologies. They insisted the messages were the result of hacked accounts. Recovery in the Chinese market would prove slow and difficult, and even years later, the brand was still working to rebuild trust there. But here's what's remarkable. Dolce & Gabbana, as a global company, didn't collapse. It absorbed the hit, took the losses in one major market, and kept building everywhere else, doubling down on the very Sicilian identity that had always been its foundation, rather than abandoning it. Because underneath everything, the tax trial, the boycott, decades of ups and downs, Domenico Dolce's original vision never really wavered. And that vision would find its most complete expression in something the brand launched back in 2012, Alta Moda. This wasn't ready to wear. This wasn't a diffusion line sold in shopping malls. Alta Moda is the absolute pinnacle of what Dolce & Gabbana does. One-of-a-kind, entirely handmade couture pieces, priced for the world's wealthiest clients, presented not on a standard Milan runway, but in breathtaking historic locations across Italy, sometimes in Sicilian villages, not unlike the one Domenico grew up in. Every stitch done by hand, the way his father once cut suits for the townspeople of Polizzi Generosa. It's the most expensive, most exclusive expression of the exact same skill Domenico learned as a child in that small mountain tailor shop, just scaled up to a level his father could never have imagined. Today, Dolce & Gabbana generates more than 2 billion euros in annual revenue, with the fiscal year ending March 2024 showing over 18% year-over-year growth. Domenico Dolce's personal net worth is estimated at roughly $3 billion. And this is remarkable when you consider where this story started. A village of 4,000 people, a family tailor shop, a boy who dropped out of fashion school because he was too impatient to wait for a diploma to tell him he was ready. Domenico Dolce had no formal training completed, no industry connections, no financial safety net, and by nearly every conventional measure, the odds against him building a global luxury empire were enormous. He proved that the thing everyone assumed was his weakness, his working-class Sicilian roots, his stubborn refusal to become something more palatable and less specific, was actually the entire engine of his success. The exclusivity, the polish, the traditional pedigree that fashion insiders assumed you needed to break into that world. Domenico Dolce didn't have any of it. What he had instead was a deeper, more honest connection to craft than almost anyone else in the room. When asked about what drove him and Stefano through all those difficult years, Domenico offered something that sounds almost deceptively simple. We lived the life, but in an honest way, without compromise, without corruption. This, I understand now, is the big key to my power, the power of Dolce & Gabbana. It's not just the clothes, it's love for the people. I want you to really sit with that line for a second, because it explains almost everything about how a tailor's son became a billionaire designer. It was never really about chasing trends or copying whatever Milan's biggest houses were doing that season. It was about insisting over and over again, decade after decade, crisis after crisis, that his story, his mother's fabric shop, his father's tailoring bench, the black lace and gold crosses of his Sicilian childhood, was worth telling exactly as it was, without softening it for anyone. Domenico Dolce and Stefano Gabbana didn't just build a fashion label. They fundamentally shifted what Italian luxury was allowed to look like. Before Dolce and Gabbana, so much of high-end Italian fashion prized restraint, cool sophistication, a kind of quiet elegance that kept emotion at arm's length. Domenico and Stefano tore that rulebook up and replaced it with something loud, sensual, deeply personal, and unapologetically regional. Designers who followed them learned that specificity, real, lived, particular specificity, not some vague idea of Italian style, could be more powerful than universal appeal ever was. You can see their influence today in how many luxury houses now lean hard into cultural storytelling, heritage and craftsmanship as the actual selling point, rather than just chasing whatever trend happens to be dominating that season. Think too about the family thread that runs underneath all of it. Domenico has often said that for Italians, family is close to sacred. For all Italian people, family is very important. We don't fight with our families, he once explained. That belief shows up everywhere in the brand's visual language, from the maternal Madonna imagery draped across their runway gowns to the wedding and baptism opulence of their alta moda presentations. It's not an accident. It's a Sicilian tailor's son building, piece by piece, a tribute to the household that raised him, a household with no money to spare, but no shortage of love, faith, or craft. In a later interview, Domenico put it simply, "Family and friends are, and always will be, our safe haven." For a man who spent his career being told his roots were a liability, that safe haven turned out to be the very thing the whole empire was built to protect. But I think Domenico Dolce's legacy isn't really about revenue figures or store counts, impressive as they are. It's about what happens when someone refuses to be embarrassed by where they came from. A tailor's shop in a mountain town nobody outside Sicily had heard of. A mother selling fabric behind a counter. A father whose hands were rough from decades of measuring, cutting, and stitching cloth for neighbors, who could never have imagined their tailor's son would one day dress the biggest pop star on the planet. Domenico Dolce took every single piece of that ordinary working-class upbringing, and instead of hiding it behind a polished Milanese persona, he built an entire empire out of it. And that, in the end, is the real story here. It was never about escaping where he came from. It was about proving that where he came from was the whole point all along.